Yeah, you still with me.
Yeah, you're not leaving us.
No.
Yeah, takes a little bit of the pressure off.
Yeah. Constant pressure. So sitting here just like, this is not going to go well. I'm going to go otherwise from the next one. Hey!
Hi, Christopher. How's it going? Good.
How about cookie? Yeah, the way you're talking about cookie. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. You got the edge of my chair. Yeah.
Tired, but it was good. Yes.
Okay, should we go down on that water?
Yes.
Well,
The area itself. Yeah. I didn't go on the boat, but I saw you.
Yeah, I'll show you this.
That's fine.
You're
allowed to do your job.
It's like
Down
a
is hot side.
It's very small. Yeah, there are a lot of really cool restaurants.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
It's not free. It's not free.
Oh, you're in the way of the screen.
Sure. I can head out. But I may not be back, Bill.
Alrighty, everybody, we're going to get started. Happy to have Paul Knight here. Many of you know, former member of our department here and was the Pennsylvania State climatologist for quite a long time. And we're happy that you came back to do a weather briefing. So thank you, Paul.
You're welcome, Ryan. Thanks for having me here, and thanks for showing up on what is a relatively boring weather day. So I hope to be able to spice it up with talking about a few other things as well. As we look at things. I guess to make a difference, go to full screen, might as well, huh? There we go. Of course, John did a magnificent Back to the Future yesterday. I wasn't sure if he was going to, so I decided to take my own tack to this a day late. As you know, yesterday was Back to the Future Day, but I wanted to remember what happened in 1985, which is when, of course, that was the movie was supposed to be taking place. And you might remember that, well, a lot of you, in fact, you'd have to be 30 years old or older to remember this, or more than 30 years old.
Well, I'm glad I'm not there. Wow.
Yeah, really. But in 1985 was the coldest inauguration of record. I guess it was. I believe it was. It was so cold that Ronald Reagan's second inauguration was held inside because the swearing in, because it was in the single digits, I believe, in D.C. and they had a snowstorm too. Of course, 1985 is also when this infamous event occurred in Pennsylvania. That was the tornado outbreak on the 31st. And of course, Weather World was around in those days, and Fred probably remembers this as well, that we had a very interesting time calling that event a few days beforehand, which was kind of exciting. And there was Gloria, and I think, Marissa, where are you? Oh, there you go. I think that was the storm that really got you charged with the weather, wasn't it? And Gloria was the classic Cape Verde hurricane that came right up the East Coast. It was the end of September. And just to assure you that there were 12 full moons during the 1985 as well too.
There's no blue moon. We were concerned.
Right, yeah, you should have been. It should have been concerned in case we skipped a moon there.
Oh, God.
So it's time for me to bring back. I introduced this. I think it was maybe last fall, maybe it was last spring. My Center for Responsible and Accurate Prediction. So if you use the acronym there, CRAP. And I have an honorable mention. And some of you on the faculty here probably saw this. This was sent to us several times during the summertime, even though I had retired. I still got this, so I had to bring it up. This was a fellow just named Ron. I forget his last name, but that's okay. It doesn't make a difference. He wrote this talking about Hurricane Danny forming in late August proves I was right about the 36-year Atlantic hurricane cycle. He had sent us an email back in November 2014, which I'm sure we didn't pay attention to, predicting the time. And because this year's Atlantic weather will exactly duplicate 1979, he figures that we'll have a winter like we did in 79-80, which will also be, he wants to know where his Nobel Prize is. Too bad he doesn't realize there's no Nobel Prize in atmospheric science. So maybe chemistry, but I don't think this is chemistry. So his name was Ron, and I just decided to add a W and a G to it, you know, because he was Ron. Because there was no Danny was just a piddly little storm that never got going. And here, just to get Ron, give him some comparison. This was 1979, which was a heck of a year for hurricanes. We had David, which walloped Florida, and also I guess it came in around Savannah or Charleston. And of course, hey, Fred was Frederick at the time, right?
I think that's right.
Yeah, so Frederick was a powerful storm that went up through Biloxi and Mobile. So this is what he was comparing. This is what year to date has been like in the Atlantic in 2015. So nothing at all like it. And the caution here is that when we use analogs for specific events, you can look pretty foolish at times. And even though I'll call upon some analog forecasting when we look into the winter, it's really, you know, these specific sort of things can really make you look like a bit of a jerk. Where are we at so far? Back to the past, since we had Back to the Future. Here are the anomalies as of 2 days ago. Of course, we don't have today's in the books anyway, so relatively recent data. Temperature on the left, precipitation on the right, and it's pretty obvious that it's been cool in the eastern seaboard area, relatively cool, and all the warmth has been primarily in the interior west and northwest. Of course, it's been very warm in the southwest at times. With the dividing line, or the trough axis, or the ridge axis, what you want to say, somewhere here in the Mississippi Valley, precipitation, which kind of reflects that, all this northwesterly flow in the middle of the country has caused very little precipitation to fall in the Mississippi, Missouri Valley. But it's been great to see a lot of precipitation in parts of the west, although it's hard to get an idea of whether that's falling as rain or snow. Obviously, snow is going to be much better, and it's still a little early for the snow season to kick in the southern Sierra, although there are some high elevations there. And of course, here's the some of the effects of that flood that was noted in South Carolina. But we've been relatively dry. And in fact, if we look at the precipitation for the past 60 days here at State College, this is using the record from the weather station here, and you'll see that we kind of have these little increments. We get these 2 or 3 day periods, and they happen to be matching around when there's football games too. But we had this period, 8th, 9th, 10th of September, where we got about 1.5 inches of rain, and then we went for a while with nothing, although this was a Saturday too. And then we have another period here, about 20 some odd days later, when we had 2 or 3 inches of rain. So it would appear that timing-wise, we're due for another episode of rain. It will not happen this Saturday, but you know, one wonders whether or not what comes the middle of next week could also be followed by a tail that will affect the next home game against Illinois. Anyway, so that's kind of the setup of the past. To go to the current, I assume that got things up here.
You go to Firefox, the first one.
Firefox.
Yeah.
Dreaded Firefox. Okay. Let's just take a look at the picture of the Northeast right now and see what's going on. There is a front that's been pretty well advertised and well predicted that's approaching the area. As is typically the case with cold fronts, they tend to be a little slower, especially as we get into the colder season. because if there's shallow cold air behind it, then it has to go over every single hill and dale to get to where you are. But the boundary is relatively evident here through the cloud pattern, and then the clearing behind it, and then some instability clouds. So let's look at the surface features associated with this, and just to confirm that indeed there is still a cold front out there. And let's up here. So there's the current conditions, and indeed there's a nice wind shift that's showing up. Well, it's not a very strong wind shift, but you can see the difference between Watertown, a southwesterly wind, and Toronto, a west-northwesterly wind. And notice the change in the dew point. In fact, sometimes I find the easiest way to find the cold front is by the dew point maximum. And indeed, there's a area of mid-50s dew points from near St. Louis, Champaign-Urbana 56, Findlay 55. I think, is that a 53 at Erie? I can't see for sure. It looks like 53. And then even some low 50 dew points going up into the eastern part of the St. Lawrence Valley. So the boundary is somewhere in here, and there have been some showers with it, but most of the showers have been falling apart. There are actually some not too far to the north earlier this morning, but those did not survive. Not that I noted. Bill, I guess we didn't get a trace or anything like that, did we? Okay. And we can just check the radar just to make sure that there's nothing imminent here. I don't think there are, but. What's interesting, and I think this is a thing to watch, occasionally, and this is just an observation, it may have really nothing to do with the real weather, but in the late autumn, mid to late autumn, sometimes the atmosphere kind of tips its hands relative to the pattern you're going to be seeing as the winter unfolds. I don't necessarily mean where the trough and ridge is going to be. I mean in terms of the frequency of trailing waves. I think that was a characteristic of last winter, was that there was always a wave would come through and then there'd be another wave on the front, most of which, in fact, not all of them missed us. That was the frustrating part, at least if you were a snow lover in central Pennsylvania. Indeed, here's the main front and the showers associated with it going through Maine. But here's a bit of a trailing wave also. And I think this may also play a role even with regard to the precipitation forecast for the middle of next week. So there's some shadow front. All the clouds and precipitation are pretty much, at least the deeper clouds are with and behind the front. And there's some showers lingering across Ohio, parts of Indiana. I have found, and maybe it's just me, I trust many of you looking at this as well too, that the HRRR is really quite amazing in terms of how well it can do in terms of short-term prediction. So rather than just kind of guessing and using the do-it-digital method, the two fingers, to extrapolate what's going on, I think that the HRRR is always worth looking at. Although it was the one that, when I looked at it last evening, was predicting that there would be showers on our doorstep at around 7 o'clock this morning, and there weren't any. Or there were wet clouds, is probably the best way to put it. But in this case, and I guess I need to stop that so we can see there's that patch of precipitation that's some scattered showers in Ohio that kind of race along just south of Interstate 80 and then actually gets suppressed as it goes east of the mountains. To take a look at the specific time when it's going to happen, let me go back here. There we go. Oops. Well, hopefully it's still there. Well, it's past us by then. This is now 22Z, so that's what is that? 6 o'clock this evening. So it looks like it's the front is certainly through by then, and the shower risk is going to be in the next couple of hours. But as the HRR has shown, it's more than likely going to be spotty at best. I think Christopher, you were on last night? Yeah, he indicated that too in this forecast last evening. But if there are going to be any, it probably will be from here south. So, whether we're going to get a measurable amount of rain, so be it. As far as once that goes by, the larger guidance shows us that the big high bills in. Oops, I wonder why I'm having trouble because I'm on the zoom in mode. There we go. And indeed, the outlook is for a relatively comfortable time, especially Any of you heading to Baltimore to see the game? Yeah, okay. Looks like it should be quite nice. And the front goes through. Initially, and there was some concern that the low levels would have some really chilly air with this, and it will be cold in New England. But you can look at this by looking at the 850s. There's some 850 temperatures here in the lower right-hand corner in New England that are down near -8, -10, which is darn cold. That's kind of like what we had last weekend, and you all remember that. But here, we get into the single digits. I'm not even sure we get below 0 at 850, which is an indication that even though it will get cooler, it won't really be all that hard to take. And this is tomorrow, so tomorrow is a gorgeous day, pretty much a lot of sunshine other than maybe a few instability clouds early on. And then Saturday, the ridge is right over the East Coast, so it should be quite decent. But sharp ridges also tend to be allowing cirrus clouds to flow up and over them. This is a pretty sharp ridge. So there will probably be some cirrus, and you can see even this less than 30% more than 30% moisture plume right here in the central part of the state. So I think that, and that's 12Z. So I think there'll probably be some cirrus that will spill in. But if you're heading to Baltimore, it's not an issue at all, really, because that'll just be a few clouds. And there's the game is at 3:30. So here's 2 p.m. bridge axis. It is starting to cloud up, and maybe a few showers coming into western Pennsylvania during the afternoon on Saturday, and then here's Saturday evening. And it looks like there could be a few showers here. And once again, notice how this is going to have a little bit of a trailing wave, I believe. Well, maybe, I guess not. Maybe this new run didn't hold on to it like it did. But the big difference is this thing here, is that a disturbance either on the boundary or separate from the boundary develops in the western Gulf of Mexico and heads up into Texas. And that's really where I want to head from here, is that, let's get out of this and go back to this, and go into talking about some of the forecast issues from here. Okay, if you had been following some of you know about the Madden-Julian oscillation, which is an area of convection that moves from west to east in the tropics near the equator, and of course so that's contrary to what the mean flow is in that region. And this area of convection has different zones, and the zones are indicated by where it's most pronounced by these numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. By the time we get to 1, 2, 3 are pretty much in the Indian Ocean, or from the west coast of east coast of Africa, all the way we get into the maritime continent, which is Indonesia, and then this would be into the Central Pacific and past the date line, and then going towards South America. This is a few days old, but I don't think there's been any substantive change. Is that there was a prediction that when it's in this inner circle here, the strength of the MJO is pretty weak. So the farther out it goes, the more exciting it is. And this was a prediction from the ECMWF. I believe that's what it says. All right, the EMON. That was indicating that the MJO will become rather strong and go through the central Indian Ocean. You say, well, who really cares about that, Paul? Well, there was an article that was written by Vittart, and actually this has been studied by other people as well, that looks at the impact of the MJO on tropical storm development, especially with regard to how well the ECMWF does in its forecast. So if you're interested, I would recommend reading. This was published in 2009. And essentially, I'm just excerpting a little piece of this, is that when the MJO is in phase 2 or 3, which is being predicted to be a relatively strong phase coming up, the likelihood, especially in the August, September, October period, of course we are moving out of October into early November, of some sort of tropical storm development is enhanced in the Bahama area, actually even out here in the Atlantic, but also along the west coast of Mexico. And if I'm not mistaken, what is it, Patricia is there, Fred? Is Patricia a Cat 2 or anything like that?
It's strengthening rapidly.
Okay.
What is it right now? Category 2.
All right. So it's a Cat 2, and And that's a very favored area. But you see, it's also favored in parts of the Gulf of Mexico and in the Bahamas. So it's not necessarily saying it's a likelihood it's going to occur, but it's certainly something to pay attention to. And the fact that the hemispheric models are able to pick up on a relatively rapid development that seems to come out of Old Mexico, or at least out of the Bay of Campeche during the weekend and into Texas is kind of interesting. So whether it's going to be sufficient to be called Kate, I don't know, because I think that would be our next named storm. However, if you look at the history, hurricanes hitting Texas, if this were to even become a tropical cyclone, I don't know, are pretty infrequent during October, even late October. The last time a hurricane had hit Texas in October was Jerry in 1989. So it's a relatively rare event. Not impossible. Generally, when there are these storms, late season storms, they usually hit farther east. If they're tropical storms or hurricanes, Florida is much more prone. Obviously, well, Caribbean is much more prone than anybody. So I'm not sure whether it's going to be an issue or not. However, I think that in general, I think Fred's spoken about this in the extended forecast, and those who have also been following it too, that we are on the cusp of getting into a wetter time. It hasn't been especially wet, although when it comes in big doses. So we're not getting frequency of rain. We are getting the amount of rain that's fairly impressive. And I have, this is from yesterday's 12Z run of the hemispheric models, the ECMWF here, the GFS, and then the CMC. And they all indicate a trough axis that's somewhere in the middle of the country. And more importantly is that they have a ridge off the East Coast, and they have a southwesterly flow. And usually when you see the different branches of the jet stream, more notably indicated by the GFS, to some degree the ECMWF, where the northern branch and the southern branch come together, because that's where high pressures tend to build at the surface, because of the confluence aloft. And this would be a pattern that had been certainly the one we're in right now, which is high pressure to the south, low pressures to the north. That's that low that's going through the St. Lawrence Valley, to a pattern that will have high pressure to the north and low pressure to the south. And that's a fairly favorable regime for it to get wet. Now, whether it's going to be frequent or not, I don't know. I think in the extended last night, on Weather World, Fred indicated that we're going to get some showers next Wednesday. Is that right? And I think that's still pretty much right on. What's uncertain about that is whether that goes by and we're just having another blossoming high like we're going to have tomorrow, or whether the high builds to the north and another wave comes by in this relatively fast flow. Because eventually the subtropics are going to have to get energized by this strong El Nino. And whether it's going to happen in late October or November or December, it's going to happen. And we'll have to deal with the fact that there'll be a wave train coming in from the eastern Pacific across the southwest U.S. into the Gulf of Mexico and then toward the eastern seaboard. I really hope that it doesn't happen on the 31st. The models have been flipping back and forth. Now they're going for a dry regime on the 31st, which is the next home game on Saturday. But my poncho is staying very close by. I've used it more in the past 6 weeks than I've had in my whole life, I think. So anyway, let's talk about the winter pattern. And I have the dancing gorillas because and there are three of them.
Of course you.
Of course, yeah. Just what you were thinking about, right? Dancing gorillas. I like to think of the seasonal pattern as being dictated by large, strong forces, and that's why I call them the gorillas. And here's the likeness of those gorillas. If we look at the sea surface temperature anomalies, gorilla number one, the dominant gorilla, the A gorilla, is of course ENSO, the positive phase of the El Nino, and it's quite strong. It is not as strong as 97, 98, but it is still quite impressive. Gorilla number two, which we've seen hanging out there for a while now, is the PDO, which has been positive, even though in the big scheme of things, it's supposed to be in the negative phase. The North Pacific should be on the cold phase. It has been flipping to warm and was warm last winter, and it's certainly heading toward that this winter. Now the third gorilla, which is a smaller gorilla and tends to be beaten up by the other ones, is this cold pool in the North Atlantic, which has been a bit of a conundrum to folks because we don't really keep track of the water temperatures in the North Atlantic all that carefully. There are some pretty good buoy data that goes way back. That's how we can at least notice this from a 60-year history of the North Atlantic Ocean temperatures. And it's really probably much more of an influence with regard to what's going to happen in Europe than it is necessarily here. But there's a mirror image of what happens in Western Europe to Eastern North America, and those are the gorillas that we're dealing with. Now, if ENSO ends up being the dominant theme, that is that it finally takes over. Remember, we were dealing with a weak to moderate ENSO or El Nino last winter. This is the typical temperature regime for the DJFs. I'm looking at December, January, and February, and there's the typical precipitation regime, which is cool in the south and then some cool near the east coast, but wet. Of course, the big message is wet in the southwest, Gulf Coast, and southeastern U.S. However, if we add in the PDO, we get far fewer cases in the past, and notice the difference is that the warmth ends up congregating over the northern plains and also the northern Rockies, and the cool is much more along the eastern seaboard, not so much in the deep south, although oddly enough the precipitation is still a maximum in parts of Texas and New Mexico, but there is tendency to show some sort of storm track along the east coast. I don't have the history of what happened with gorilla number 3 because nobody's been paying attention to it, but I bring it up because no doubt when things go awry in the forecast, the seasonal forecast this winter, they'll point the finger at that thing and say, oh, well, if you'd only known about that. Here's a comparison of 1997 versus 2015, kind of year to date or month to date in terms of the temperature anomalies. It's a little bit fuzzy, but that's okay. It's better to look at these things as they're fuzzy. This is 1997. This is 2015. So the biggest difference, of course, is the North Pacific, which in 1997 was cool in the North Pacific, just a little bit of warm water near Alaska. Notice how much warmer it is. Also, look at the difference in the Atlantic. It was warm in the central North Atlantic. Now it's cold in the central North Atlantic. So insofar as sea surface temperatures being an arbiter of the likely effects of the seasonal weather pattern and the anomalies associated with it, 2015 is quite different from 1997. So to say it's going to be just like 1997 would really be a misnomer. And here we'll do the, as Fred says on Insure Bets, we'll do the math for you. So we'll do the subtraction to take a look at the difference between 2015 and 1997. In this case, red means 2015 is warmer, and it is dramatically warmer in the North Pacific. Not so much. Notice that along the equator, or where we would typically look at in Nino 1 and 2, and even parts of Nino 3 and 3.4, it is a little bit cooler this year than it was then. But we can see that there's some fairly big differences, and including in the maritime continent area here, where the water is significantly cooler this year. What happens when the PDO outduels ENSO? So that is that what happens when the North Pacific ends up being the dominant influence rather than ENSO? This is, and of course this is some degree what we noticed last winter. This is the temperature pattern that occurs, and there are more than a few years when we've had a strong PDO or a warm waters in the North Pacific, and it's quite cold. In fact, the center of chill ends up being, at least this is the frequency, so this is a percent of years of temperatures above normal. So there have been hardly any years in parts of Pennsylvania, the Mid-Atlantic region, 5 or 10% out of all those years you see here, including last year, that have been warmer than normal. And then precipitation-wise, the dry weather tends to be in the Ohio Valley and also in the northern plains. Not necessarily terrifically wet along the East Coast, but there's a frequency for precipitation to be above normal in that area. So it really is, it's a fairly, we're at a time right now, and we could look at other stuff. We could look at the Judah Cohen's work about the snow cover in Siberia versus near the end of October. We look at the Laptev blocking pattern, in the northern part of Russia, which is an interesting thing. There's some work that's been done to see if there's a block in there during October. but those are still unsure because we don't know the outcome of the October weather pattern in those areas yet. But certainly if we're looking at the two gorillas, the two big gorillas, if the PDO ends up being the dominant feature, it appears to be the biggest difference from 1997, which was a very mild winter, then it'll be cold again this winter. So, and here's what I find the most challenging parts about these 3-month forecasts. I took the temperature pattern from December 1st last year to February 28th this year, and if you remember, last December was actually fairly mild. This is the normal temperature in that period, and December ends here. So we had lots of days that were above normal. In fact, I don't remember specifically. Maybe Bill might remember these numbers. I think it was, what, 5 degrees above normal? Yeah, it was quite warm. Obviously, many temperatures, maximums well above seasonal levels. And of course, when January came, it got kind of cold, and then it got milder. But it ended up being that by the time we got to the beginning of February, the chill in January almost perfectly offset December's warmth. So we were at near zero, which meant that February was going to be the arbiter of the sign of the season. And of course, as you remember, February we had hardly any days above normal. In fact, by the time we got to the last 20 days, last 15 days of the month, it was brutally cold, and that ended up being the decider of the entire 3-month period temperature regime. So I've looked at this. I wonder, do we have the know-how, the ability to predict a 2-week period of extreme cold temperatures more than 90 days in advance, which were going to be the ones that determine the signature of the seasonal temperatures in northeastern North America? And we don't. I know everybody is willing to take the kudos for the fact that they predicted that it was going to be a cold winter, and it did end up being a cold winter. But heck, it took till the middle of February and a regime that was unprecedented to be able to do that. And in fact, look how many times we had near or record low temperatures. We have 4, I think, last February. So I just think that the granularity or our ability to be granular with regard to these sort of forecasts is just beyond our ability right now. Todd.
Just a question. If you could go back, Paul, to that last graph.
Yeah. Oh, this graph here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I remember, I think, is if we could go to the left of that, just how anomalous the November of 2014.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was it was almost like a winter month for a lot of the U.S.
But it was 2 weeks.
It was just 2 weeks.
It was just 2 weeks. Yeah. It's like when you have a contractor to do work in your house. How long will it be? 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Yeah. So.
Do you remember if there were any signs in October that there would be that extreme cold in November?
Well, arguably, we had that, the greatest quote-unquote cyclone in the North Pacific. This was a typhoon that then became extratropical, and I don't remember what the pressure was, 922 millibars or something like that. Remember this, Fred? 919. It was something ridiculous that ended up spinning up into the Aleutians, Western Aleutians, second week of November. And voila, it just, rearranged the entire weather furniture so that the long wave trough came into the east, and it just spilled everything that was out of central and northern Canada for 2 weeks. It broke just after Thanksgiving, you might remember, too. But that was arguably that was an interesting episode that was related to a specific event. Whereas this, I don't know. I don't think there's anything like that happened. I don't know anybody. I mean, the models were showing it as we got closer, but they were all a bit timid. They were showing incredibly low thickness values, but everybody at that point didn't want to believe it because it had been so cold anyway. So it's like, no, we don't want it to be cold anymore. Of course, it was as we were approaching the shoulder season, so it was really not. It didn't have the effect, for example, on the markets, especially the energy markets, as it could have if it had come in December. Everybody would have said, "Oh my goodness, this is going to be it from now until February." One last thing, because I'm running a little bit over, and I don't want to. just to let you know, speaking about alum stars, if you don't know that Steve Travis is our alum from here who works at AccuWeather, is he's the star in the Jekyll and Hyde, the musical that's playing at the State Theater, starting tonight through Sunday. So it's pretty neat. He's a meteorologist, but he sings and dances too. And that's what there'll be a lot of when we get to the seasonal forecast. There'll be a lot of singing and dancing, and that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out. Next week's speaker will be Lee Gruncy, a former professor at PSU.
All right. Paul, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
What do you think about the blob of warm off the California coast? Because I mean, it's huge, and I'm just curious. I don't know how deep it is, or what. Have you seen that in the past in anything, and how that'll impact?
Well, it was there last.
Right, it was there, but not as pronounced as
Yeah.
what we're seeing now. Because to me, that's the other third blob that kind of stands out compared to what I've seen. Compared to 97 was old.
Well, when you this thing here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's somewhat related. There's this thing called Nino Modeki.
Okay.
Now, that's not a Modeki area. Most of the Modeki, this is the Japanese paper that's written about the various forms of El Nino. And most of the time we look actually at the where the center of the warmest waters are, obviously relative to normal. It's well north of the equator. But I don't know if anybody's actually done a specific study on that particular area, much like in the North Atlantic. I think that's exactly where we really should be heading with regard to our seasonal forecasting, is seeing what about these moving blobs of very warm or cold water and their situation. But our records are not necessarily consistent in areas. Of course, the Argos have been in the Pacific for a long time. We are getting decade plus, several decades worth of water temperatures. But I don't know. No, I don't know. Except to say that obviously, if the water's warm, then there'll be some high moisture content available, and if we do indeed get a southern storm track developing, it should be able to be sufficient to produce a lot of precipitation. Whether it's going to be in California or more likely in Texas. But by the way, just so that you know, what have I been doing myself? I've been with my family. My wife and I are going to the football games, and I'm still biking. So, all right. Thanks.